The 1543rd meeting of the Security Council is called to order.
Sécurité est ouverte.
1543 заседание Совета Безопасности объявляется открытым.
Y abre la sesión 1543 del Consejo de Seguridad.
Which is contained in document stroke 9831.
Les membres du Conseil ont également reçu
Express the desire to speak before the Council votes on the draft resolution. The first speaker on my list is the representative of Cyprus, on whom I now call.
Straying from the norms of a unitary state into the negativeness of division does not provide a solution. It only aggravates the situation. The government of Cyprus, while making every possible concession in order to meet the other side, cannot possibly go beyond the framework of a unitary state in a way that would destroy the integral unity of the island. The process of conciliation towards concession towards accommodation should always be governed by the main objective, namely that the solution is just and workable. To obtain, whether by pressure or otherwise, consent to a settlement which is unsound in itself and intensifies division or is contrary to the principles of the Charter is not a solution. It is merely moving from one stage of difficulty into a worse and more complicated one with far graver consequences to the people concerned and to international peace. In this sense, Mr. Chairman, my President, Archbishop Macarius, while stressing that there was no intention or wish whatsoever to derogate from the rights of the Turkish Cypriots as equal citizens, made it clear that his government would accept neither cantonization nor federalization of Cyprus. The fundamental difficulties in the present problem are obvious. Difficulties, however, among men of reason and goodwill are not to be shunned, but should be faced and overcome through patient and diligent efforts towards mutual understanding. It is therefore an encouraging sign that both the interlocutors, Mr. Clerides and Mr. Denktash, emphasized that the talks have not failed and should be continued despite the difficulties involved. Both sides are thus fully agreed, at least on one premise, that there should be a new, determined effort in the talks. This shows that the road to mutual understanding is open. President Macarius, in a relevant statement, said, and I quote, "We shall continue the talks with inexhaustible patience and goodwill," unquote.
J'appartiens à ceux qui ont constamment regretté le rythme lent des négociations de Nicosie, tant dans mes entretiens avec le secrétaire général que dans mes interventions au Conseil de sécurité, tout en reconnaissant les difficultés auxquelles elles se heurtent. Lors de la séance du 11 décembre 1969 du Conseil de sécurité, j'avais dans mon intervention fait de nouveau part au Conseil des inquiétudes que nous causait le fait que ces entretiens marquaient le pas. J'avais notamment dit que, et je cite, « En ce qui nous concerne, nous sommes plus que jamais convaincus que les deux parties à Chypre doivent activer leurs efforts afin que les entretiens auxquels elles se sont engagées aboutissent à des résultats positifs. Et j'ai eu par le passé l'occasion d'assurer le Conseil que du côté grec, nous considérons le facteur temps comme étant d'importance. Nous maintenons cette opinion. » Fin de citation. Par la suite,
ask for the floor at this time. The Council will proceed to vote on the draft resolution contained in document S/9831.
Je remercie Monsieur l'ambassadeur de la Grèce.
Gracias, señor embajador de Grecia.
There are no further speakers. Accordingly, I shall put to the vote the draft resolution contained in document S/9831.
Il n'y a plus d'orateurs, je mets donc aux voix le...
Those in favor, please signify.
Pour ce projet, vous êtes priés de lever la main.
За, прошу голосовать.
Los que estén en favor levantarán la mano.
The resolution is unanimously adopted.
La résolution est adoptée à l'unanimité.
Резолюция принимается единодушно.
Meeting has been convened in accordance with the request of the representative of Finland. It is later of 5th June, document S/9824, to consider the question of initiating periodic meetings of the Security Council in accordance with Article 28, paragraph 2 of the Charter. In this connection, I should like to draw the attention to the note of the President of the Security Council dated 20th April 1970, document S/9759, enclosing a memorandum of the delegation of Finland and proposing in his capacity as the representative of Finland that consultations be undertaken in this matter. And as a result, I have been authorized to make a statement expressing the consensus of the Council. The text of the statement is as follows. The members of the Security Council have considered the question of initiating periodic meeting in accordance with Article 28, paragraph 2 of the Charter. They consider that the holding of periodic meetings at which each member of the Council would be represented by a member of the government or by some other specially designated representative would enhance the authority of the Security Council and make it a more effective instrument for the maintenance of international peace and security. As to the date and other practical aspects of the first such meeting, these will be considered later in consultations. It is understood that periodic meetings, the purpose of which would be to enable the Security Council to discharge more effectively its responsibilities made under the Charter, would provide members with an opportunity for a general exchange of views on the international situation rather than for dealing with any particular question, and that such meetings would normally be held in private unless it is otherwise decided. The provisional agenda of periodic meetings shall be drawn up by the Secretary General in consultation with the members of the Council and in accordance with the relevant provisions of the provisional rules of procedure. I take it that it may now be considered as approved by the Security Council.
Первый выступающий по списку представитель Финляндии, которому я предоставляю слово.
Algunos miembros del Consejo de
Mr. President, it gives me great pleasure to extend the best wishes of my delegation and myself to you as President for the month of June and as representative of a country which has played such a constructive role in the work of the Security Council and the United Nations as a whole. I'm also very happy to have the opportunity to pay tribute to your predecessor, the Ambassador of France, who guided us through the storms of May with such a firm yet tactful hand. The Council has been convened at the request of my delegation. I should make it clear at the outset that Finland claims no exclusive copyright to the idea of breathing life into Article 28, paragraph 2 of the Charter. Secretary General Tant, before him Dag Hammarskjöld and Trygve Lie have advocated the holding of periodic meetings of the Security Council at ministerial level. Other statesmen, among them the Foreign Minister of Belgium, Pierre Armel, have made the same suggestion. Most recently, the proposal on the strengthening of international security put forward by the government of the Soviet Union at the last session of the General Assembly included a recommendation addressed to the Security Council to consider this question. In the debate on this proposal, many delegations spoke in favor of initiating periodic meetings in accordance with Article 28, paragraph 2 of the Charter, and the widespread interest this idea has aroused among member states is also reflected in the replies of governments on measures for the strengthening of international security circulated in the Secretary General's report of May 15, 1970. The active interest my government has taken in pursuing this matter in the past months arises from Finland's strong commitment to the United Nations as the primary instrument available to states for maintaining peace and security. I had occasion to speak about this on January 24th last year when Finland for the first time was represented at this table. I said then that as a small neutral country which has sought and found security not through military alliances but through a foreign policy designed to keep it outside of international conflicts and controversies, Finland has a vital interest in promoting the development of a peaceful and rational world order based on the universal collective security system provided by the Charter of the United Nations. Primary responsibility for the effective functioning of this system rests with the Security Council, the supreme organ of cooperation between nations for the purpose of maintaining international peace and security. It follows that we wish to do whatever we can to make the Security Council more effective and more responsive to the needs of international life. No one needs to be persuaded that the Security Council so far has failed to play the role it was originally supposed to play in international affairs. Too often during the past quarter century, at moments of crises and conflicts threatening the peace of the world, the Security Council has been reduced to sterile debate or completely bypassed by events. The reason for this is, of course, not any structural weakness or deficiency, but the lack of agreement between the major powers on making use of the Council for the purpose it was created. The effective functioning of the Council, and therefore of the whole system of collective security of the United Nations, presupposes a measure of common purpose among its members, and particularly the major powers permanent members of the Security Council. During the period of the Cold War, this common purpose was manifestly lacking. In recent years, while the rivalry between them continues in many areas, the major powers have shown a greater measure of willingness to work together for the preservation of peace. As a result, the effectiveness of the Security Council has increased. At least in some situations, the Council has been able to take action to contain conflicts which otherwise might have endangered international security. To Today, the Security Council has taken a further step in this direction by deciding to make use of the provisions of Article 28, paragraph 2 of the Charter. In itself, the addition of a few more meetings to the schedule of the Security Council would not seem to be much of an advance. Potentially, however, the holding of periodic meetings at ministerial level, especially once they become customary, could mean a qualitative improvement in the functioning of the Security Council. They would add a new dimension to its role as guardian of world peace. Instead of merely reacting to violent events, the Security Council could begin to look forward and take action in time to forestall conflict. I realize that more often than not, the failure of the Council to direct events in the interest of maintaining peace and security has been due to lack of agreement on how to deal with the political issues which cause conflicts between nations. But at times, the difficulties in the way of constructive international action for the maintenance of peace have been compounded by the absence of established procedures for advanced consultation between the powers concerned. A more imaginative use of the Security Council could remove such difficulties. Consultations within the Security Council can be held at any time without preliminary argument about the shape of the conference table. Potentially, again, periodic meetings could contribute to making the United Nations what it originally was intended to be, the center for international consultations on the vital issues affecting world peace. In the past decades, the great powers have usually held their talks outside the United Nations, while the Security Council too often has occupied itself with the trivialities of international life. Periodic meetings not only would provide the permanent members of the Council with a regular forum for high-level consultations, but also would create a new channel of communication between the permanent and the elected members of the Council, thus helping to bridge the power gap which during the last session of the General Assembly was the subject of much discussion. Since we have no experience of periodic meetings, it is wise, I am sure, to allow them to evolve as freely as possible without putting them in advance into a procedural straitjacket. In the consultations that have preceded this meeting, it has been agreed, as you, Mr. President, have already stated, that periodic meetings should normally be held in private, unless it is otherwise decided. It may well be that both private and public meetings will be held. It has also been agreed that the agenda for such meetings should be worked out by the Secretary General in consultation with the members of the Council. We could imagine that the agenda might consist of a single item, a review of the international situation. It is further understood that periodic meetings would provide members with an opportunity for general exchange of views rather than for dealing with specific events or issues. Consequently, such meetings should not be expected necessarily to lead to decisions or resolutions, although naturally this would not be excluded. The compulsive habit of United Nations bodies to view every international problem in terms of a resolution sometimes inhibits members from even discussing important issues. Periodic meetings should be freed from that inhibition. For understandable reasons, it has not yet been possible to determine the date of the first periodic meeting of the Security Council. I'm sure, however, that no one will disagree with me when I say that the forthcoming session of the General Assembly offers the obvious opportunity to make a start. And I trust that it will be possible to set the date before long. While the provisional rules of procedure stipulate that 2 such meetings be held annually, it is natural from a practical point of view that each meeting will have to decide on the next one. We, for our part, are convinced that the full value of periodic meetings will emerge only when they are regarded as a permanent institutional feature of the Security Council. Only thus will it be possible to build up a practice, or better still a habit of consultation in an atmosphere free from the inflated expectations of summit meetings. The holding of periodic meetings is but one of several proposals recently put forward for improvement improving the functioning of the Security Council. I have in mind, among others, the ideas mentioned by the governments of Brazil and the United States in their replies on the strengthening of international security. They deserve most careful study. I think it's significant that there seems to be among the members of the United Nations a greater interest and reform in devising ways and means by which the Security Council could be made a more effective instrument for peace. The Secretary General said 3 years ago that previous efforts to implement the relevant provisions of the Charter on Periodic Meetings had failed not on their merits, but on the basis of the prevailing atmosphere at the times when they were made. Today, too, the international atmosphere is far from peaceful. War and conflict and tension prevail in several parts of the world. But surely the present state of international insecurity in the 25th anniversary year of the organization, their willingness to strengthen the capabilities of the United Nations to discharge its primary responsibility, which is the maintenance of international peace and security. Thank you, Mr. President. I dispense with consecutive interpretation.
Monsieur le Président, je voudrais d'abord dire pour les interprètes que je renonce d'avance à la traduction consécutive. Monsieur le Président, dans le langage un peu particulier des Nations Unies et ce vocabulaire assez ésotérique qui n'est pas d'emblée compréhensible ou accessible à tous les initiés, un consensus est un accord qui ne soulève ni enthousiasme ni objection majeure. En effet, s'il y avait des objections et si une seule délégation manifestait son opposition, ce ne serait plus un consensus, mais un dissensus. Tel n'est pas le cas du texte que vous nous avez lu et auquel ma délégation s'est volontiers ralliée. Je voudrais en exposer brièvement les raisons. En vérité, lorsqu'il s'agit d'organiser des réunions périodiques du Conseil de sécurité, conformément au paragraphe 2 de l'article 28 de la Charte, il ne saurait y avoir d'objection puisqu'il s'agit d'appliquer une disposition qui figure déjà dans la Charte et ma délégation ne peut se prononcer qu'en faveur de tout ce qui tente à renforcer l'autorité de notre Conseil et à accroître l'efficacité de l'Organisation des Nations Unies en ce qui touche le maintien de la paix et de la sécurité internationale. Il s'agit dans le cas présent de dispositions qui étaient en sommeil pour des raisons connues de tous et de chacun, et si le moment paraît venu de les ranimer, nous n'y voyons que des avantages. Nous estimons en effet que des réunions au niveau ministériel peuvent se révéler utiles à la coopération internationale dans des circonstances données, et si bien entendu certaines précautions sont prises. Ordre du jour, arrêté au préalable et d'un commun accord par les membres du Conseil, séance privée de façon à permettre un large et libre échange de vues, une franche discussion sur des sujets spécifiques à déterminer, ou mieux encore, sur un rapport du secrétaire général portant sur la situation internationale dans son ensemble. Ce serait au surplus pour notre Conseil l'occasion de marquer de manière appropriée la commémoration du 25e anniversaire de l'Organisation des Nations Unies que d'envisager de tenir une telle réunion à une date proche de la session commémorative en mettant à profit la présence à New York des ministres des Affaires étrangères. Mais c'est évidemment
à la lumière des résultats de cette réunion que l'on pourra décider s'il y a lieu d'en tenir d'autres et de se prononcer sur leur périodicité. Dans l'introduction au rapport annuel du secrétaire général pour la période du 16 juin 66 au 15 juin 67, document cité dans le mémorandum de notre collègue finlandais sous la cote S 9759, M. Tante, après avoir affirmé que, je cite, « le moment paraît venu de tenter à nouveau de donner effet à ces dispositions », ajoute ce qui suit, « je songe à un début modeste qui permettrait de s'assurer de l'utilité de telles réunions. » Fin de citation. Ma délégation partage absolument le sentiment de notre secrétaire général et estime comme lui qu'avant d'aller de l'avant, il serait sage de mettre la formule à l'épreuve. L'ambassadeur de Finlande y a fait allusion en soulignant les précautions nécessaires. Il serait inutile, donc dangereux, de se réunir pour se réunir, d'organiser des réunions académiques en dehors du temps et des événements, de sacrifier à un rite en dehors de toute réalité. Tels sont, Monsieur le Président, le sens et la portée des observations que je tenais à faire au nom de la délégation française. Je voudrais, en terminant, adresser nos remerciements à notre collègue finlandais pour avoir soumis cette question à l'attention du Conseil et exprimer l'espoir que son initiative soit couronnée de succès, que notre première réunion au niveau gouvernemental s'avère féconde et ait des prolongements heureux. Merci.
Mr. President, I too waive my right to consecutive interpretation. It is rare indeed when this Council takes unanimous action twice in 1 week. This happy coincidence, we hope, will prove to be a good omen for the decision which you, sir, have just announced on behalf of all members of the Council. We find that the decision to hold periodic meetings of the Council, as provided for in Article 28, Paragraph 2 of the Charter, to be particularly fitting during this 25th anniversary year of the founding of the United Nations. The origins of this provision and the attempts over the years by 3 Secretaries General, the General Assembly, and individual members to activate it have been set out in the memorandum prepared by the delegation of Finland and circulated as document S9759. That document correctly states that previous efforts to implement this important charter provision failed not on their merits, but on the basis of the prevailing atmosphere at the time when they were made. The United States concurs with that assessment. Of course, the present state of international affairs can even now hardly be described as tranquil and ideally suited to thoughtful initiatives designed to accomplish the longer-range goal of gradually building a suitable foundation for peaceful change. Nevertheless, it is unlikely a perfect time for such an initiative will ever exist, and a start should be made. All of us owe a debt of gratitude to the distinguished representative of Finland, Ambassador Jakobsen, for refusing to be discouraged, for seizing the initiative, and in patient consultations working out the consensus which you, Mr. President, were good enough to read to us a few minutes ago. Of course, no organ, no matter how important, can assure success through the adoption of procedures alone. The test will come during the periodic meetings themselves in the quality of the preparation, which will be a vital element, and in the statesmanship shown in the general exchange on the all-important problems under consideration. Parenthetically, I would like to note that it is our understanding resolutions on individual subjects will not, as a general rule, be adopted during the periodic meetings. If this important provision of the Charter is utilized effectively, as intended by its drafters, this could make a significant contribution toward strengthening the role of the United Nations, and the Council in particular, in fulfilling its chief function of maintaining international peace and security. Thank you, Mr. President.
Mr. President, as I did not speak at the last meeting, may I take this opportunity to associate my delegation with the high tributes. My delegation welcomes the initiative taken by the distinguished representative of Finland to activate a provision of the Charter which has been in a state of dormancy for a quarter of a century. Article 28, paragraph 2 of the Charter provides that the Security Council shall hold periodic meetings without, however, specifying the frequency of such meetings. The late Secretary General Tregely favored semi-annual meetings, and his suggestion has found expression in Rule 4 of the Provisional Rules of Procedure, which stipulates that periodic meetings should be held twice a year at such times as the Security Council may decide. Yet, in the entire history of the United Nations, no periodic meetings of the Security Council have ever been held. This does not mean that the relevant provisions of the Charter and the Provisional Rules of Procedure have been forgotten. On the contrary, recommendations have from time to time been made both by the successive Secretaries General and the General Assembly to revive periodic meetings. As early as 1950, Secretary General Tregely made the inauguration of periodic meetings the first of the 10 points in his 20-year program for peace through the United Nations. 2 years later, the General Assembly recommended, quote, that the Security Council should convene a periodic meeting to consider what measures might ensure the removal of the tension at present existing in international relations and the establishment of friendly relations between countries whenever such a meeting would usefully serve to remove such tension and establish such friendly relations in furtherance of the purposes and principles of the Charter. Indeed, there were times when the meetings of the Security Council were attended by foreign ministers and other specially designated representatives. One readily recalls the series of meetings held in 1956, which were attended by the foreign ministers of such member states as Belgium, France, the Soviet Union, the United Kingdom, and the United States. The foreign ministers of non-council members such as Egypt and Israel also attended. After the general debate, the Council discussed the Suez problem in 3 closed sessions. These meetings could be said to be on a high level as envisaged by Article 28, paragraph 2, though they were not designated as periodic meetings. No one, Mr. President, I think, has any illusions about the magical potency of periodic meetings. There is no reason to suppose that problems that have hitherto defied solution would instantly be resolved once they are discussed in periodic meetings. Mr. Tregely was well aware of this when he wrote in the introduction to his annual report in 1950 that it must be, quote, understood in advance that such periodic meetings cannot be expected to produce solutions by magic, and that they should be regarded instead as an important part of a continuing process of negotiation, a process which in the United Nations should never end, unquote. Mr. President, it is the earnest hope of my delegation that the consensus we have just unanimously adopted may prove to be the first step towards the strengthening of the Security Council in the exercise of its primary responsibilities in the maintenance of international peace and security. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the Ambassador of China. My delegation has welcomed the initiative of the Finnish delegation in calling the meeting of the Security Council to consider the question of initiating the implementation of Article 28, paragraph 2 of the Charter. We have also welcomed the consensus statement made by the chair. The views of my delegation on this question were made clear in the statement of the Nepalese representative made at the 1650th meeting of the first committee when it considered the Soviet proposal concerning the strengthening of international security. We stated then that according to our understanding, the founders envisaged the role of the Security Council as not limited strictly to action after the event, but as that of the guide and leader of the events too. My delegation went on to say, and I quote from the statement, all three Secretaries General of the organization have made repeated suggestions for the active implementation of Article 28, paragraph 2. The atmosphere so far as it relates to the relationship between the present 4 permanent members of the Council has somewhat improved. To that extent, and in a limited way, such a periodic meetings could be useful. End of quotation. My delegation then pointed out the fact that since 1949, the Security Council was suffering a serious institutional weakness which had vitally affected the role of the Council as an effective instrument for international peace and security. This was the statement that I wish to make it in my capacity as representative of my country. Meeting is adjourned.
La séance est levée.
Заседание закрывается.
Delegation of Nepal feels strongly about the unhappy situation which prevails in the Middle East. The whole region has been passing through a state of warfare and turmoil for a long time. Experiences have shown the utter futility of all attempts to solve the question by military means. Continued occupation of the foreign territories, consolidation of military conquest, hostile expedition across the frontier, all these actions and attitudes lead us nowhere near the final settlement. On the contrary, they make any settlement more difficult. The occupying authorities have taken further measures in a clear bid to change the status of Jerusalem in defiance of the decisions of the General Assembly and the Security Council. Jerusalem is a question of acute international concern. These measures already taken and contemplated are of such magnitude that their effect would amount to the annexation of the city. Private lands have been requisitioned, private homes bulldozed, and hundreds of families evicted. All this shows not only the defiance, but the contempt with which the decisions of our organization, reflecting general world opinion, are treated by the occupying power.